this Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live.
We're focused on making sure we are the clean and conventional energy superpower we can be.
Crude demand. Ottawa creates a sovereign wealth fund to help finance major national projects. Could that help push forward a pipeline? The Minister of Energy, Tim Hodgson, joins us.
Canada has a very rich history of defense innovation.
Leveraging defense. Ottawa looks to strengthen sovereignty by cutting reliance on the U.S. Could defense tech play into negotiations with Washington? Elliot Pence, the newest member of the Prime Minister's U.S. Trade Advisory Council, is here.
It's a complete breakdown of all safety protocols.
Call for accountability. Tumbler Ridge families are suing OpenAI, alleging the company failed to warn authorities of the killer's troubling behavior. What precedent could this set? I'll speak with the lawyer representing the families. It all starts now on Rosemary Barton Live. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. U.S. President Donald Trump has given his stamp of approval to a new Canada-U.S. pipeline.
Slightly different than the last administration. Very different than that. They wouldn't sign a pipeline deal, and we have pipelines going up.
The proposed project would run from Canada down to Wyoming, carrying up to 550,000 barrels of oil a day. It comes, obviously, at a tense time for the two countries as Canada looks to move its reliance away from the U.S. as trade talks continue and their CUSMA review has to get underway still, and as Canada is looking to build its own pipeline to the West Coast. Earlier, I spoke to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources about what a Canada-U.S. pipeline could mean for the country and those ongoing major projects. Minister Hodgson, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Rosie.
Lots of different questions because there's lots going on in your file. I want to start with something the president did this past week, signing the order to authorize the Bridgers pipeline, which would run along that same piece of the Keystone XL pipeline in the United States. I know Keystone has come up between the Prime Minister and the President before. Do you see this as potential leverage for Canada in trade talks?
You know, Rosie, we're in the middle of discussions with the Americans. What we're focused on is building Canada strong. We're focused on making sure we are the clean and conventional energy superpower we can be. We are working with allies around the world to make them more energy secure. And we're very focused on diversifying the number of countries we can trade our energy with. Today, we trade almost all of our natural gas and oil with the United States. We think it's in our interest to diversify that. That's why the government was so supportive of building the original TMX expansion. That's why we are supportive of the potential optimization of the TMX pipeline, and that's why we're working with Alberta under the construct of the MOU to find a constructive way, a way that Canadians can agree to expand it to another 1 million barrels of oil to Tidewater, because that is consistent with what we need to do as a country.
Well, and I'm not going to, I'll get to that pipeline because I certainly have some questions there as well. But certainly, Canada's not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, right? In the mouth. Like, if the U.S. says we want more and here's a pipeline, that will presumably go ahead, I would imagine.
So as our Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, I'm focused on what we can control. Yeah. The United States has a process to go through. They have, as I understand it, given a permit for a pipeline to cross a border. Yeah. My understanding is there are several more steps in the U.S. regulatory process. As we've seen recently, the U.S. goes from the IRA to the big beautiful bill. Their regulatory volatility is quite intense. They previously approved this pipeline and then canceled the pipeline. So to be honest, I'm focused on what Canada can do. The Prime Minister says we can't control what the United States does. We need to be aware of that. We need to be cognizant of it. What we can control is what we do. And that's why we're so focused on building our LNG exports, on building exports to Tidewater. That's how we build Canada strong.
Yeah, it sounds like that's your preference, that you just forge ahead with the plan that you have. Am I reading that correctly? Because you're not sure what will happen with this other pipeline that the president approved.
What I'm saying is we'll react to the Prime Minister said it very well. We will engage with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. The pipeline that the President approved is at a very early stage. It's an approval for a pipeline to cross the border. There are a number of incremental steps that they have to achieve. We've seen in the past the U.S. approves pipelines and then cancels pipelines. We can't develop our trade strategy on that assumption.
Okay, so let me ask some questions about the pieces that you can do or that you have some control over. The pipeline to Tidewater that is possible, I think, now with Alberta because of this MOU. There has been some suggestion, Minister, as you know, that the federal government would prefer a southern route instead of going north, as is the preference from Alberta. Do you at this stage have a preferred route in terms of what would make sense or make it most likely for a proponent to come along?
As we've been very clear, the proponent chooses the route. The proponent is going to spend the money to do the work to ensure that route is viable, to ensure that route has the support of First Nations, to ensure that route has the support of the affected jurisdictions it goes through. Those are all conditions, and also that has significant First Nations ownership. Those are all parts of the MOU, and it's up to the proponent to come forward with that. Alberta understands that. That's part of the deal. They have said they will come forward by July 1st, and when they do, we'll sit down with them and Alberta and First Nations and see what is possible, because we believe it is in Canada's interest to diversify our energy exports. It is all about not reducing what we sell to any one customer. It's about diversifying our exports to new customers. And the Prime Minister's been clear, we need to more than double our exports to the non-US countries. We need to attract $500 billion of private sector capital to our economy to deal with the realities in the world today, and this is a core part of doing that.
The Sovereign Wealth Fund that the Prime Minister announced last week, that is not up and running yet. It's $25 billion of seed money. Could that be used for something like a pipeline? Because it is supposed to be an investment vehicle for major national projects. So if the federal government decided that that would be a worthwhile place, because this is important as a goal, as a mission, as the Prime Minister would say, would the Sovereign Wealth Fund be used for that? Could it be?
So that fund is still under development. Let's talk about what that fund is for. We have a number of tools in our toolkit on how to get major projects built today, focused at different parts of a capital structure. So without geeking out too much for your viewers, we have the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which provides concessionary capital or affordable finance and debt financing for projects. We have the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program, which supports Indigenous communities in investing in equity in projects. We have the Canada Growth Fund, which is focused on taking first-of-a-kind risk that commercial parties don't want to take. So we did that in the Darlington nuclear reactor. We don't have a vehicle today to make major commercial equity investments alongside major proponents where Canadians would get to participate in that. Sure. And so if there is a proponent who wants additional equity to get a major project done, that's what that fund will be designed to do. It'll also be an opportunity for, sorry?
No, I was just going to say that's a very good explanation, because I will admit I still have lots of questions about it because it wasn't well detailed in the economic update. But to get back to my question, I think that then means that it's possible that sovereign fund, that Canada Strong Fund, could be used for a pipeline if it were to be one of those projects.
So again, it's a hypothetical question. A proponent would need to come forward with a with a proposal.
Yep.
They would need to say they want access to additional equity, and the fund would need to be up and running and have its mandate and its governance architecture set up. And at that point, they would look at the situation. But it's a purely hypothetical question right now.
But it's not. But it's possible. I mean, if it's going to be out there and used for potentially lots of different major projects, that is also a possibility.
It could be used for transmission lines. It could be used for ports. It could be used for nuclear projects. It could be used for renewables, and it could be used for pipelines.
Okay. Let me end on this, because as you well know, oil prices have surged again this week, making it really difficult for people, for regular Canadians, in spite of the excise tax break that the government gave people. It's still going up. I wonder whether you see increased opportunity for Canadian energy, though, because of this conflict that the world finds itself in.
What we see is our allies all around the world calling Canada and saying, what's happened in Ukraine, what's happened in the Middle East is making it abundantly clear energy security is national security. And many of our allies around the world are really struggling, and things are much worse in those countries than they are here in Canada, because we have security of supply. And as they look around the world and look to diversify who they buy from, they see Canada and our ability to get our natural gas to Tidewater, our ability to get our oil to Tidewater as incredibly attractive. They say, you are a reliable supplier. You are a reliable ally who will not use energy for coercion. You are a reliable who believes in the rules-based order. You're a country that honors its contracts. We'd like to do more business with you.
Okay, Minister Tim Hodgson, come back anytime. I know you're busy, but lots of interesting things to talk about. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. Take care.
The spring economic update also had new funding aimed at growing the labor pool in the skilled trades. That includes nearly $6 billion in spending over 5 years to recruit and train skilled tradespeople. The Prime Minister says the funding will tackle an expected shortfall of 1.4 million more trade workers by 2033 from a combination of growing demand and, of course, retirement. Mark Carney says the funding will go towards financial support for apprentices and employers who will take them on, as well as proposing a federal body to help connect prospective apprentices with workplaces looking to hire. Joella Fletcher is currently going through her carpentry apprenticeship, and she joins me from Shakespeare, Ontario. Nice to meet you, Joella.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So you're a carpentry apprentice. Tell me what that process has been like for you to get involved, and what drew you to it.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually started in high school. In my grade 12 year, I did high school co-ops, and then that led to me falling in love with carpentry. So I put that ball rolling, and I did a pre-apprenticeship program, and I've been with that work placement ever since then. So I've now been with them for 3.5 years, and I'm almost done my apprenticeship.
Wow, that's great. And what has it been like during that period? Are you getting paid? Are you getting paid enough? Can I ask those questions?
Yeah, for sure. I am non-union, so it works a little different if you ask a union versus non-union apprentice that question. I have been very blessed. I have an amazing employer, and they've given me so many opportunities. I'm pretty happy with where my pay is at, especially since I'm non-union. So again, if you ask a different apprentice that, they might have a different opinion.
Well, would that be a concern, though, for other trade people, that as they're training, they are not making enough money to live?
Yeah, for sure. Especially someone that's looking to get into an apprenticeship. If they're working currently at a job that is paying them like $30 an hour, sure, why would they want to get a level 1 apprenticeship making $22 an hour, for example?
And what about for the employers, too? Because there was a piece that was announced that would help the employers so that they could attract people. Like, are there enough businesses out there that want to take on apprentices?
Mm-hmm. Currently, from what I'm seeing right now, if you go on and you start a job search to get an apprenticeship and you're looking for a level 1 apprenticeship, right now what I'm seeing is that most employers are looking to hire a level 2 or a level 3 apprentice. So I'm looking to see more employers willing to hire a level 1. Right now, the hardest part for people that want an apprenticeship is finding one. Yeah. So I understand giving an incentive to hire level 1 apprentices But on the other hand, that's the cheapest you'll ever have to pay that apprentice. So is that $10,000 going to help you, the employer, pay them more money? Or is it just going to help them pay them the low rate? Yeah.
So the government obviously sees that, and many governments have, but this is another attempt to try and get people into the trades. You were lucky you found it in high school, but do you think that we're doing enough to tell people that there are other jobs out there? You don't have to go to university. There's other ways to earn a living.
Yeah, I did have a lot of great teachers in high school, but what I wish I had a bit more of was seeing guidance counselors have more knowledge about pathways into the trades. A lot of people are older and trying to get into the trades, but if you want to start them younger, high schools need to be able to provide the information just as much as they provide information for university.
And what about being a woman in the trades? Because I know sometimes that can be a challenge too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can go on for days about the different barriers that women face in the trades, but regardless, at the end of the day, we're all tradespeople. We all have barriers and challenges that we face. So while women have more, like finding proper PPE that fits, having barriers from coworkers that may not see you as an equal, those challenges can also be found for even other apprentices that are in different minorities as well.
So you're doing okay, but what do you make of the fact that the government is putting $6 billion towards this in the hopes of attracting more people like you?
I think it's necessary. From what I'm hearing from across Canada from apprentices, we need this support, and especially financial support. There are a lot of apprentices that have financial barriers when it comes to completing their levels of schooling, to getting proper tools that they need for the job, and potentially relocating in order to do schooling. I think it's really necessary.
What do you like about carpentry?
I love how vast carpentry is. A lot of people don't understand exactly what carpenters do. It's so broad. There's so many different pathways you can take with carpentry alone. That's what I love about it. There's just so many options.
What do you do? Like, what do you make? What do you focus on?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of residential work. I've done heritage work as well, so restoring really old buildings and bringing back that character. But I also have started to do some commercial jobs where I'm building affordable housing and also some sustainable building as well.
So for young people watching and thinking, is this what I want to do? Is this what would you say to them when to consider a trade?
Yeah, if you're in high school and you're watching, or if you're about to go into high school, I highly recommend taking a co-op or even looking into a dual credit program. Well, these are closer to grade 11 and grade 12s. I highly recommend, and that's not just people in the trades too, like getting a co-op in high school helps open your eyes to different careers and opportunities that might either lead you on that path or show you want to look at a different path.
That's cool. Okay, Joelle Fletcher, nice to meet you. Thanks for taking some time with us this morning.
Of course. Have a good night.
Okay, you too. Canada has been selected to host a defense investment bank for NATO members and allied nations to help finance defense and security projects.
Whether it's in building ships and icebreakers, whether it's partnering, greater partnerships, more intensive partnerships in building new aircraft and others. So all of this is good news.
So what could the bank mean for Canada's defense industrial strategy? I'll speak to a defense industry CEO and member of the Prime Minister's Trade Advisory Council about all of that. You're watching RBL. Canada will be the headquarters for a new defense investment bank for NATO members and allies. The bank will help finance defense and security projects. The PM says it's a recognition of Canada's expertise and innovation.
It's a testament to Canada's reputation, Canada's commitment, Canada's financial expertise, and our sense of innovation and partnership.
The bank is the latest development in what is Canada's growing defense industry, which has seen funding for defense and procurement increase under the Prime Minister as part of the new defense industrial strategy, which aims to strengthen Canada's sovereignty by cutting reliance on the U.S. One company hoping to help those goals is Dominion Dynamics. CEO Elliott Pence is also the newest member of the Prime Minister's U.S. Trade Advisory Council. I spoke with Pence about his role in the council and how he hopes to develop Canada's defense industry. Elliott Pence, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You have spent some time with the Prime Minister, and you are now part of his new U.S. Trade Advisory Council. I guess I want to start broadly with what your concerns are about the state of the non-negotiation or the talks between the two countries right now.
I'm not sure if I have concerns yet, Rosemary. The talks have not started. I'm interested and eager to find out the direction of those talks. I think from a substantive perspective, it's important to have the technology community, the intangible community involved in those conversations. And, in large part, that's sort of what I'm representing in the council, that and the industry that I'm operating in, which is defense.
And how do you see that playing into the conversations in terms of a sovereignty perspective or a leverage piece? How do you see that playing into that?
Yeah, I think possibly both, right? I think the healthy tension of the council and certainly of the conversations with the Americans will be, how do you deepen the integration without doing so in a way that creates more dependency? And then also the mandate of the Prime Minister is, how do you diversify our own economy without being indifferent to the industries that are most deeply integrated into North America and the U.S. And I think that is going to be a continual debate and challenge, and frankly also opportunity for the negotiations.
Given the Prime Minister's desire to, A, spend billions and billions of dollars in the defense industry and get up to that 5% of NATO target, and given that he wants to create a defense industrial base inside Canada, how do you see yourself contributing to that, and how realistic is that?
I think it's very realistic.
Okay.
Canada has a very rich history of defense innovation going back really to Avro Aero, but we built the first passenger jet. We built, arguably with the Aero, the first third-generation fighter. We're obviously now in the process of buying fifth-generation fighters, but we also built the fastest warship. We built the first autonomous submarine. We built the first 2 operational drones. So I actually think the model for the conversations with the Americans can look back on our history of defense innovation as one in which we have deeper integration, but we're not dependent on the Americans. We are leading. If you look at what happened after the Aero, when Diefenbaker canceled it in the early 50s, most of those scientists went to NASA and contributed to the Apollo program. So I think that the defense technology and innovation sector can offer an interesting model for a way forward with the Americans.
Do you think that we were too dependent on the United States for our defense and security as a country?
100% we are. I mean, I think that's a fairly obvious fact. I mean, we were buying north of 70% of the material for our military from the Americans. The Prime Minister has since said he wants to effectively reverse that from 70% American to 70% Canadian. Again, I don't think this is. I think it's a challenge, but I think it's fully doable with the industry that we have. I'm obviously coming back to build in the defense sector, and I anticipate others will too.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw this week that it was announced that Canada will be home to this Defense Security and Resilience Bank that is to provide equipment for Canada and for NATO allies. It seems like that is a little bit what you're trying to do with your company. How significant is that decision, do you think, to have the bank inside Canada?
Well, I think it's further testament to what the Prime Minister has outlined. I mean, he is incentivizing capital to come forward into Canada. We're certainly seeing that on the equity side. What the Defense Resilience Bank does is incentivize the banks to extend loans and better credit. So I think it's a good move. I have not had direct conversations with the folks at the bank or at the incipient bank, the policymakers behind it, but I think it's important.
Maybe you could explain to people how you are tackling the defense industry differently in your company. Because if I understand correctly, instead of waiting for governments to put in orders, you're doing the opposite. You're going to have stuff ready to buy off the shelf. Is that sort of the simple way to understand it?
Yeah, I think that's the right way to understand it. I guess put differently, what we're doing is saying we have high conviction about the future of warfare and defense. We're just going to go build it. We're going to do it on risk, so off our own balance sheet, frankly, with venture dollars. We're going to get it deployed with the warfighter. We're going to see if it works. And then once we've built the trust with the user, with the warfighter and the soldier, know that it works, then we're going to go back to the government and say, look, this is what we've done. Let us into the tent here. We've done something and it's important. We're also, because of that, operating at lightning speed. So we were able to develop, we've been alive about 11 months, 10 products, we've deployed them 5 times. So it's a completely different cadence to how you develop the technology for the warfighter.
How might anything that you're working on help achieve some of the concerns that Canada has around its sovereignty, particularly in the north?
Yeah, so what we've built is something called Oranet. In the simplest way possible, it connects autonomous systems. So Canada has, the largest coastline in the world, a vast area. Obviously, the Arctic is. We're not going to do it entirely with humans. We have rangers and obviously communities up there. But fundamentally, we need technology to connect different sensors so that we know what's actually happening.
I'm going to end on a more personal question because it's my understanding you've been away from Canada after 20 plus years, I think, and you're now in the process of moving yourself and your family here. Can I ask why you're doing that?
Yeah, I grew up in Victoria, went to school in Victoria. I've been in the States for 20 years. I'm doing it because I feel like I can affect a change. I'm doing it because it feels like we have the leadership right now. And I'm doing it because I want to give back to my country. I love Canada, and I think we have an opportunity to change the country here.
Do you feel like we are in, to borrow the Prime Minister's words, a hinge moment in terms of our relationship with the United States? And is that part of what's sort of driving you?
Yeah, part of it is certainly being driven by that, but I think it's broader than that, right? It's sort of a post-rupture world where, yes, a lot of this realignment is being driven by the current administration in the U.S., but there's a lot of realignments happening geopolitically. And as the Prime Minister outlined in his Davos speech, that is not just a U.S. thing, it's a global thing, and Canada has a role to play. I'm trying to build tools and capability that give Canada leverage in those conversations.
Elliot Pence, nice to meet you. I hope you'll come back.
Thanks for having me, Rosemary.
We're going to talk more about pipeline proposals. The U.S. president approving that new one from Canada to Wyoming. Well, new, old, Keystone XL-ish. While Ottawa considers adding crude oil capacity to BC's coast. How much demand is there for Canadian oil and gas? The Sunday Scrum are back. This is Rosemary Barton, live.
let's be clear, we're never going to cut our American allies off of our energy or selling our resources. They buy twice as much as the rest of the world combined buys from Canada. But we can offer in the negotiations to build up our resources in a way that helps our continental security, that keeps both of us safe, strong, and rich.
Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre speaking just this morning in Toronto, answering a question about that cross-border Bridgers pipeline that U.S. President Donald Trump gave his approval to last week. It comes as Ottawa and Alberta look into possible routes for a pipeline to the BC coast. So how likely is either? What are the politics involved? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Nick Taylor-Vasey, Ottawa Bureau Chief for Politico, co-host of Playbook Canada podcast, Émilie Nicolas, columnist for Le Devoir in Montreal, and Rob Shaw, political correspondent for Czech News in Victoria. Émilie, I'm going to start with you if I can. Maybe let's just start on whether that pipeline that the president has approved should be something hopeful for Canada, is a point of leverage. I'm not sure the Prime Minister believes it is. And certainly we heard from the Energy Minister there that I don't think anyone wants to put all their eggs in the same basket. But it seems like it should be on the table as a negotiating point. So I'll start there with you, Émilie.
I mean, any indication that Canada is contributing to the American economy would be something to point out in a rational negotiation. I think we've left that land a long time ago, and so that's why just traditional logic doesn't necessarily keep track with reality. I also think that it's really important when you look at the other potential Pacific leading pipelines that people are thinking through, that now, since the extension of Trans Mountain, there is more that is going to China and Japan, South Korea, but also that for the most part, even if Canadian oil goes to the ocean, a lot of it is just basically still redirected to the United States as well. And so we still have a long way to have that diversification. And it's a hard question because first of all, Asian Pacific countries are also trying to leave themselves from oil and having that green transition really fast. They're not trying to be oil dependent from imports forever. They also want to have economic sovereignty, and also the planet and gas emission aren't going away anywhere. And see First Nations rights, and the fact that they're opposed to any building of pipelines leading into the ocean is also not going to go away.
The Energy Minister there, Tim Hodgson, Rob, was talking about the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which I think a lot of us are still trying to understand, mostly because the government hasn't said very much about it, and not because we don't understand the concept. But it certainly seems as though it could be used for a potential pipeline if there was a private proponent, if it needed additional support. I wonder what you make of the idea that fund could eventually end up in that sort of project.
He did eventually get around, Rosie, to your last question and saying, yes, it could be amongst any other things. But there's so much we don't know about it that it's hard to say if it would, get a project over the finish line or not. I thought his comments that Canada can't rely on the ups and downs, the ins and outs of a pipeline project, this Keystone XL Part 2, because it was, canceled by Obama, brought back by Trump, canceled by Biden, brought back by Trump again, that it's not reliable to get too interested in this right now when you don't know. But on the other hand, Mark Carney brought this up in the Oval Office with Donald Trump in October, the idea of Keystone XL. So there's got to be some win in Canada for getting that far, I guess. And I think the idea, I'm not the Prime Minister, but I think the idea was to use it in some way to advance our position with the United States, whether we call that leverage or not. Yeah. And I know the Prime Minister is saying we don't want to use energy as leverage. It just makes sense that we are supplying something the U.S. wants. That's the whole point of the trade talks. So I think I'm not sure how to square all of that into a circle on where Canada stands on this.
I'm not either. And you make the point about what the Prime Minister told our colleagues at the Canadian Press, that he didn't like the word leverage when it comes to energy because the negotiation is about as Rob says there, Nick, things that people want and negotiating how to make that work. I mean, he can say that, but it is also leverage in this instance. And I wonder how we should take both the president signing off on that and then, of course, the idea that we could use taxpayer dollars perhaps to move along a big project.
I mean, there's no question it's leverage. There's a reason that since the trade war began, every Canadian politician, no matter whether they are near the oil patch or thousands of kilometers away, are talking about just how much Canada exports to the United States. I mean, it's been a top, if not negotiating point directly, at least conversation piece in every conversation with probably every American who will listen. But I was also struck, like Rob was, by the energy minister's comments on what he called regulatory volatility in the United States with respect to the Bridger pipeline, a project that was canceled and brought back. He is criticizing the American regulatory environment in a way that sounds not unlike how Canadian energy producers have talked about the Canadian environment. And when the minister was in Houston for Sarah Week, which is like global energy palooza in March, he played good cop down there, and he was talking about being energy dominant with the United States, working together with the United States. And he met with two cabinet secretaries down there, both for energy and interior, and he brought a happy message to them. We are your partner. And so it's interesting to watch him talk in Canada and what he's willing to say on your show. And not that it's particularly contradictory, but it's certainly a different message than the one he would take down to Houston.
Well, I wonder if it's, things have evolved that quickly, and it is difficult to, you're not going to shut down the idea of another pipeline, Emily, but at the same time, if you're trying to diversify to other markets, as you made the point to begin with, it sort of leaves you struggling to decide where to put your energy. I don't mean that literally. And but tell me whether you think it is part of the negotiation with the United States, Emily.
I really don't think the negotiation with the United States is based on rational rational arguments. It started with the whole farce about drugs coming in from the Canadian borders and how we had to put on a SAR. It is absolute nonsense. And the Supreme Court of the United States has said that some of the tariffs and the way that Donald Trump has been handling the negotiation has left the land of not only common sense, but also legality a long time ago. And so we need to remember when it came to Keystone XL, I remember #Standing Rock. And the huge protests that were happening from Native Americans, and that is still a thing that hasn't been solved, although it's somehow out of fashion to speak about that. But we really are talking about projects that would harm the environment, trample human rights, to maybe have an argument in a negotiation that isn't based on arguments. And so I'm personally not necessarily following why this is such a great thing, but maybe others have better ways of understanding how this is happening.
I think you make the right point, though. If it's not real, because it has to be signed off on by states and Native American communities and the rest of it, Rob, is it even something that's worth considering for the government as a leverage point? And maybe that's what the minister was getting at, too.
It's possible. I mean, what is real without protest in anything at this point? I think the Carney government put a lot of chips down on the table to voters that they were a government that can get big things done again, and you cannot get consensus to do anything in this political day and age. So the idea that Keystone XL Point 2 or the BC Alberta pipeline is going to come through with everyone holding hands and being happy is not the reality. And this government probably is going to have to force things through, especially the BC pipeline, and that may extend down to the U.S. as well.
Nick Taylor-Vasey, Rob Shaw, Emily Nicolas, thanks. Nice to see you all. Have a good rest of your Sundays. Appreciate it. The families of the victims of the Tumbler Ridge mass shooting are taking OpenAI to court over its role in the shooting. I'll speak with one of the lawyers representing the families about the case and the damages that are being sought in that tragic shooting that killed 8 people, including 6 children. You're watching Rosemary Barton Live. The families of the victims of the Tumbler Ridge mass shooting are taking the artificial intelligence organization OpenAI to court in California. The company behind ChatGPT has faced criticism after the Wall Street Journal revealed the account of the 18-year-old shooter was not reported to police ahead of the shooting that claimed 8 lives, including 6 children. In a statement this week, lawyers representing the family said, quote, Sam Altman and his leadership team knew what silence meant for the citizens of Tumbler Ridge. They were focused on what disclosure meant for themselves. One of the survivors of the shooting, Maya Gibala, remains in hospital with her mother accusing the company of prioritizing profit over people, saying, quote, the stakes could not have been higher when 12 of your employees advocated to contact Canadian authorities. What could possibly have been so bad for your profit margins if you just picked up the phone and made a short phone call? Jay Edelson is the U.S. co-counsel representing families and victims of that tragedy. He joins me live this morning. Thank you for making some time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
Why did the families decide to go through a lawsuit, and particularly, if you can explain, a lawsuit filed in the United States?
Sure. The families went through an unmanageable tragedy. I was in Tumbler Ridge last week and meeting with them. We saw not just the specific family members, really the whole town was devastated. They've waited 3 months now for OpenAI to do anything at all. And OpenAI hasn't. They hide behind press releases and empty statements. And they haven't given the families any answers. So one of the main reasons we decided to file a suit was families need to get answers. They need to see the chat logs, and they need to understand how OpenAI had 12 safety employees jumping up and down saying we need to call the RCMP, we need to stop this before it happened, and they were overruled by the leadership at OpenAI.
Just for balance, OpenAI says that since this happened, it has spoken to the Canadian government. It has strengthened its safeguards, including improving how ChatGPT responds to signs of distress and when to escalate threats of violence. Do your clients believe that those changes have been made and that would prevent something like this from happening going forward?
No, absolutely not. So I've been suing OpenAI on behalf of wrongful death clients for the past year. Every time something happens, whether it's a suicide or a murder or other mass shootings, this isn't the only mass shooting that OpenAI has been tied to. They come out with the same type of press statements. They say, we're really sorry this happened. We're going to do better in the future. They're never concrete about what changes they're going to make. And the truth is they don't want to change their platform, and they're not going to unless they're forced to, either through the lawsuits or through the government.
How challenging is it, though, Mr. Edelson, to prove that it was, obviously it is the person's responsibility, in this case, the shooter. So how difficult is it to make that case legally, that a bot or an AI app is somehow responsible for the actions of a human?
Yeah, the best evidence we have, first, are the chat logs themselves. We've reviewed dozens of chat logs, and what you see is this isn't like Google where you just type in a search and get a response back. This is an interactive platform, and what ChatGPT does, and it's fairly unique in the AI world, it will not only validate what you're thinking, but it will amplify what you're thinking. So when you have people who are mentally ill, it leads them into these conspiracy-laden worlds and really pushes them into violence. And so we think this case, a jury's going to be with us. We're confident about that.
Sam Altman, as you know, he did write that apology letter to Tumbler Ridge, where he talked about how deeply sorry he was, that indeed there, I guess more should have been done in terms of alerting law enforcement. What kind of, how much do you think that apology will factor into the lawsuit in terms of taking responsibility or a liability for what took place?
It's an empty apology. We've given Sam an open invitation to come to Tumbler Ridge, meet with the families. It's a short flight for him. He can get on one of his private jets and come there at any moment, and he hasn't done that. Real accountability starts by actually sharing information with the families, looking them in the eye, explaining why OpenAI failed and what it's going to do to change things going forward. And he just frankly hasn't done that.
And the decision to file in the United States, is that because you're more likely to get somewhere, or is it because the damages can be so much significantly higher than they can in Canada?
So OpenAI's major defense in these lawsuits is just to try to delay things as much as possible. Filing in Canada, what you would see is Sam Altman would claim that the Canadian courts don't have jurisdiction over him. He would end up being able to drag that out for a long time. We want to get to a jury as quickly as possible. We also think it's really important that that the people who judge him on the jury are the people who know him best, which are other San Francisco people, his neighbors. People in San Francisco know him very well. He has a lot of trouble telling the truth, and we think that's going to be an important part of this trial.
But it is accurate what I said as well, right? That damages can be significantly higher in the United States.
That's correct.
Yeah. I'll just leave it on this. Government is obviously trying to find ways to manage regulations around artificial intelligence. Do you think that will work, or do you think it has to come from companies?
I think that this is the most powerful consumer technology the world's ever known. And right now we're trusting people like Sam Altman and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg to have the correct moral instincts. And frankly, I don't think they do. It's a totally unregulated industry. I think government has to step up and move as quickly as they can. And I think lawsuits also will be pretty helpful. Companies won't do it on their own.
Jay Edelson, thank you for making the time for us. Appreciate it. I hope we'll speak again.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. The Prime Minister continues his visit in Armenia today, the first non-European leader to be invited to the European Political Community Summit. They're talking about Ukraine, and of course, the Prime Minister looking for other opportunities to diversify trade for this country in the European Union. So we'll keep our eyes on that through the day. Have a good rest of your Sunday. I'll see you back here next Sunday, if not before. Take good care.